me, I'll tell you, by the end of this evening. But thankfully, that's why we only made it an hour. So you'll be all right. Wonderful to have you all here. Thank you so much for coming along. Again, if you have any issues, please do feel free to unmute yourselves and share any questions that you might have. We've got a little bit of a presentation here, hoping there'll be a few minutes at the end. We might be able to answer any questions that haven't come up, but also at the end, if you feel like there's something specific that has come up that you feel that hasn't been answered, please do feel free to stay on with us and we'll go there. I have got a presentation, so I'll just get it for a second now. We'll talk about that later. So, some of you may have run Alpha previously, some of you may not, but it's always good to just kind of go back to the very basics. What is Alpha? Alpha is a series of interactive sessions that explore the basics of the Christian faith. There are three main components to every single Alpha. That's to connect, to talk, and discuss. So every single Alpha begins with a time of some kind of food, whether that's a cup of tea and coffee, something simple with a bit of dessert, or whether that goes to a full-blown meal. It's completely down to you and to everything that you have going on. Then we break into a time for the talk, which is usually either done by video or it can be done with a live talk. Some people have the scripts that they like to talk themselves, or they can use others that are there. And then the most important part of every single Alpha, which is breaking into a time of discussion, which is really where Alpha happens. I've said, you can run 100 Alphas and you will always run a different Alpha because of the makeup of the groups, of the people who are in there and the stage of life that they happen to be at. It's always different. It's always interesting. Alpha is a journey. Exploring faith is a journey, and we're just trying to walk with people on that journey. Key component of Alpha is that there's no pressure, no charge, and no follow-up. Really what we're looking to try and do, this isn't catechesis, this isn't kind of trying to get them to go to your church. This is an opportunity to try and greet them and walk them through an encounter with Jesus as a person. So there's no pressure. If they don't have to talk, if they don't want to talk, they don't have to say the right things, but not under any kind of pressure at all. There's no charge. We don't believe that people should have to charge to hear the gospel. Now, obviously, sometimes there's overheads and some people can have donation boxes or whatever. That's fine, but we tend to say that Alphas themselves, we shouldn't charge for them. And there's no follow-up. So if someone goes 1 week and doesn't come back another week, we don't send out the SWAT team looking for them. But that said, we also want to make sure that people feel known and loved. So if, for example, someone's been coming for a number of weeks, but then doesn't come back 1 week, it's okay to reach out to them to see is everything okay, to see if there's anything that they need. Sometimes that can help too. But basically, we're not just, if someone decides it's not for them anymore, that's totally fine. They don't have to come back. And then a key component of Alpha is the weekend away, the retreat day, the Holy Spirit day, whatever it is you want to talk about. This could be an option where you can also introduce worship. But the Holy Spirit day really is the crux of the Alpha, because Alpha is coming to know the person of Christ intellectually, and then through an encounter with the Holy Spirit, hopefully come to know the person of Christ through your heart and through an encounter with him, which is what praying with the Holy Spirit allows people to be able to do. So that is a key component of what Alpha is. Alpha is usually 15 sessions of about 11 weeks. Some people do it over 10 weeks, but there's different ways of doing it. The first 6 sessions really are the ones that we say have to be done in this particular order. So is there more to life than this? Who is Jesus? Why did he die? How can I have faith? Why and how do I pray? And why and how should I read the Bible? They're the first 6 key components of what Alpha is. Then you have how does God guide us? You have the Holy Spirit weekend then that comes in, which really is all about the Holy Spirit. Who is the Holy Spirit? What does the Holy Spirit do? I can be filled with the Holy Spirit. And then sometimes people will use the how can I make the most of the rest of my life video on the retreat day as well. And then afterwards you have how can I resist evil? Why and how should we tell others? Does God heal today? And what about the church? Now, especially after session 6, you can start to mix these around, put them into different orders and all that kind of stuff. Some people will say, okay, we're going to do it over 10 weeks. We're only going to do these ones. But this is the overall of what Alpha could be. A typical Alpha session, if you have a team, let's say you're starting at 7:30, your team might meet at 7 p.m. to pray, because prayer really is vitally important. Then also you can just check everything, make sure that the video and sound and all that kind of stuff is working. Setting up the hospitality as well will be a key part of that. The guests might come along at 7:30, where you can kind of welcome them, give them a brief overview of what the evening will look like, and then you can serve your food and start the good conversation around then as well. Then maybe your MC would do an official welcome, encourage guests to grab a bit of dessert if you've had a bit of the hot food first, and you can grab the dessert afterwards. And then you start your video at about 5 to 8. Each of the videos are about 25 to 30 minutes long. And then it will come time to break into the small groups. And this really is the crux of Alpha. This really is where Alpha works best and most profound. So you want to make sure that you have a good amount of time in the small groups, at least half an hour, usually up to 45 minutes can be a good way in small groups, depending on the size of them and everything that's going on too. Then you would end your small group discussion about 5 to 9, and brief preview of next week, official send off, and make sure that everybody is good by 9 o'clock. We like to say that Alpha starts on time and ends on time. We think that Alpha can generally be done in about an hour and a half in the evening, and generally what you find is that people are chomping at the bit. They want to stay behind and start to have longer conversations and all that kind of stuff, especially as the weeks go by. And that's totally fine for those who do want it, but also we have to be aware of those who can have a strict home time if they're getting back to a babysitter or something like that too. So that's a typical Alpha session. And then you would have a team debrief after that when the guests have gone home, and just to make sure that you're able to pray again on Thanksgiving and maybe pray into any particular situations that came up at that time, and then to be finished at about 9:30. So we talked about team, and team is vitally important across the Alpha suite, but most especially on Alpha. The importance of a good team it can't be underestimated. Generally, we say a team of 6 to 8 people, again, depending on the number of guests. We like to choose our team wisely, don't just do a general call for volunteers. We really do want to try and find the best people who are best fitted for something. Team members should ideally know and love Jesus, be committed, reliable, open-minded, being key, flexible, able to listen, and be people persons. This is really, the kind of core components of what you would like from people. Knowing and loving Jesus, but also knowing and loving other people and knowing how to listen and to bring them there. So if you're running Alpha in person, you might need someone on administration, someone on hospitality, someone who's really good at the social side. Maybe you need someone who's good at tech. You might even like to include some music. You're definitely going to need some small group hosts and helpers. We'll look at them shortly about what they're like. If you're running Alpha online, you'll need at least one of each. So an MC, someone who's able to welcome and gather people, a co-host who's able to kind of push people around into the breakout rooms and all of that kind of stuff, and a tech person who will be able to share screens and share the videos and all that kind of stuff too. So we have an Alpha team guide, which is everything that you need to know. It's absolutely brilliant. You can buy one physical copy from our website. Really good stuff. Everything that you need. You can also get a free guide on the My Alpha section, which we will talk a little bit about as we move forward this evening. But everything that you need in here, a breakdown of what each session is like, icebreaker questions, all the questions that you could possibly need for moving forward, how to deal with tricky people. It's got training, it's got absolutely everything that you need in that team guide. So strongly recommend that if you have a team, every single one of those people, leaders, should have a team guide. Now to the crux of the matter, small groups on Alpha. This really is the key component of Alpha. What if someone talks too much? How do I respond to their questions? How do I lead this small group? What? All the questions you could possibly have. Small groups on Alpha. First thing, as I said, icebreakers. Icebreakers are really important. There's a great one that you can start with, which is the name game. I'm terrible at remembering people's names, but this is a really good one to start with. So it's the your first name, the first letter of your first name, and also a word that begins with that first letter of your first name, a positive adjective to describe you. So I'm generally jovial John, and then you might have Sweet Susan, active Alan. And then as you go around the group, each person has to remember the person who's been there. It's a great way of getting to know everyone's name, but also finding out a little bit about them too. Or another one that works quite well on this is a deserted island. If you were stuck on deserted island for a year, what 2 personal items would you take with you? We generally kind of say nothing religious because you don't want people to feel uncomfortable about feeling like they're supposed to give a particular answer. But what two personal items that you take with you? It's a really good way of finding out something about people too. My own personal favorite icebreaker, I think you find out way more about people if you ask this particular question, which is your favorite flavor of ice cream? I think you can find out an awful lot about someone about what flavor of ice cream they like, and you find out more about someone if they don't like ice cream. You should hear the gasps that go around the room if someone doesn't actually like ice cream. So yeah, I'd strongly recommend that one, but you can always come up with your own ones too. So small groups, it really is all about belonging. We're trying to build relationships. We're trying to help people feel like they belong. We don't need them to believe anything. We don't need them to behave a certain way, apart from respectful of all the other people in the group. But this really is about belonging. Help them to feel at home. And in a small group, we listen to hear. We don't listen to say something back. We don't listen to respond. We don't listen to retort. We don't listen so we can pull someone out about what they've said. We listen to hear. We hear what they're saying. We also want to allow people to openly express their thoughts and their feelings in a safe space. We want to encourage them to be able to share more with people who are there. We also never want to correct a guest. This isn't how places. This isn't, we're trying to put people right on certain things. We don't correct them. We just allow them to state whatever it is that they need to state. I would say that's very interesting. What does everybody else think? So that's a key component. The structure of the small group as well is key. It's just like you're inviting someone into your own home. So it's a host-guest model. It's not a small group leader, it's a small group host. And we want to try and help people to feel like they are being hosted in someone's home. We keep the same small group every single week as we move forward, which allows people to grow connections with each other, which enables some people to be able to open up because they start to feel safe. And so having the same small groups each week just allows that build-up and that understanding of people. Ideally, we would have 6 to 8 people in a breakout room if you're doing it online. If you're in person, we say 8 to 10 people is ideal. It used to be up to 12 when it was in person, but we found since COVID that people prefer small groups. It allows them to be able to have time to think, to be able to have time to respond, to be able to have time to really engage with people. If you have a team big enough to do it, ideally you would have one host and one helper. Oftentimes, if you have a small team, you can just get away with having just a host, but having a host and a helper can really enable you to do things. And we'll find out more about that next. And we want to pray for those who are going to be in each group from the beginning, whether that's praying for which group they should be in and which leader host they might be with. But it's also at the start of each week. You want to pray for the people who are in your small group. And you want to pray for them because, again, they are probably walking this spiritual battle, and you want to make sure that they are protected through everything that they are doing too. So, the hosts, who do you choose to be small group hosts and helpers? Hosts do not need to be experts in theology. In fact, it's often much better if they're not, because what you're trying to do is you're not trying to put people in their place. We're trying to listen. We're trying to journey with people. We're trying to walk with them. We're trying to help them to feel heard. We're trying to love them into submission. Remember, philoxenos, love of the other. We're really trying to just love the other person. We want to create a relaxed and respectful atmosphere. And we want to facilitate open discussion. We really want to try and make sure that that is at the center of everything. Open discussion, allowing people to be able to speak and to be heard and to feel loved. A helper's job, you might know a person who'd be a perfect helper. They mostly stay quiet and they listen and they pray silently. Try not to, say this enough, but if you're praying for a small group as a helper, do so silently. There's nothing quite as off-putting as you're in the middle of a conversation and someone's praying in the corner out loud. So what we're trying to do is just pray for people silently in our heads to help people, to make sure that God is at the center of everything that's happening. Small group hosts and leaders. So the role is to keep the conversation going, not to dominate the conversation, to just make sure that it keeps going. You want to lead the discussion, keep them on topic, which is easier said than done sometimes, but that is where the art of a good alpha host really comes into their own. We want to affirm and listen to people. Whatever anyone says, no matter how shocked you may be, no matter how counter your own personal beliefs or feelings, it may be. We want to affirm people for what they're doing. We want to facilitate a balanced discussion, so it's ensuring that everybody is able to feel heard, that they're able to get their point across, that there's equal time for people to be able to discuss, because again, we're probably talking about some pretty deep things in these groups. We want to ask open-ended questions. Yes, no will kill the conversation very quickly. An open-ended question will do it. And we're not there to repeat the alpha talk. We've done the talk, that everything is already in there, all the right input. The small group is just about allowing people to respond to that. So small group helpers support the host as they lead the discussion. They can join in when prompted by the host. They don't want to talk too much. Helpers are often the ones who speak least in an alpha small group. And the idea there is that there are some people who really don't want to talk. And if they know that there is someone who is always going to talk after them, or still haven't talked, it might be easier for them to kind of step in to be able to say something. They don't feel so bad about being the last person to speak. If they know that there's someone else who never speaks, it will give people an opportunity to be able to step in. So they also pray for the group and the discussion. But as we said, not allowed. That could tend to end the conversation quite quickly, probably. You need to resist the temptation to correct a different belief. Again, this isn't about correcting, putting people into any kind of belief situation. We just want to understand where they're coming from, help them to feel loved. So how do we keep the conversation going? How do we kind of start it off? How do we keep it going? So starting it off, really good open-ended questions like, what did you think about the talk? Was there anything in the talk that stood out? I like to ask, was there anything that you agreed or disagreed with? Because oftentimes, we're assuming, if you just assume that everybody agreed with everything that was said, there are some people who maybe have been bristled a little bit during it. So giving them an opportunity to be able to say something maybe that they disagreed with, you'll find some people are very passionate and you're very good at jumping in at those points to talk about. What do you think? And what do you feel? And I think they're really important to ask those two questions, because some people process things differently. Some people love to think, very heady. Maybe they need time to think, or maybe they can kind of immediately respond when you say, what do you think? Other people, very much feeling kind of people, need to think about and need to feel, like, how did you feel during that moment, or what did it make you feel? Or how do you feel now when you think about that? Giving people an opportunity to process their understanding and emotions differently. And then asking, what does everyone else think? So if someone asks something, it's okay to push it out to the wider group and to allow that kind of group dynamic and conversation to take place. Keeping the conversation going is another beautiful little art form. Tony Blair once said that he ran an alpha small group before he went to the G8. And he was chairing the G8 summit. And he said that everything that he learned in an alpha small group came in really handy when he was at the G8, because you always have the same type of people. You have people who will dominate the conversation. You have the person who doesn't want to say too much. You have the person who's belligerent and believes they're right all the time. You have other people who are just unsure and a bit emotional. And he said that amazingly, everything he learned in an alpha small group helped him. So keeping the conversation going, that's interesting. Asking follow-up questions and statements, identifying the difficulty, struggle, and pain, giving everyone the opportunity to share if they want to. So it's okay if someone hasn't said something by the end of the evening, it's okay to ask them by name. Is there anything that you would like to say? Is there anything that you agree with or disagree with? And allowing them the opportunity to be able to speak. If they don't want to, that is totally fine. But you want to make sure that everybody has the opportunity to do so. You want to affirm people's honesty, because again, they can be quite vulnerable if they're coming out to talk. You want to thank them for taking the risk in sharing. You don't want to answer every question, but there are some questions that you do have to answer. So where are the toilets? What time does this finish? There are some questions that's okay to answer in a small group. You don't, if someone else where the toilets are, you don't have to say, that's an interesting question. What does everybody else think? You can tell them where the toilets are and that kind of thing. But we don't want to answer every question. We want to allow people to be able to grapple with some of these big things, because we're trying to help people to come to encounter Christ, and ultimately Christ is the only one who has all the answers that we want. And we want to allow silence. the opposite of what this breakout group has been. I'm terribly sorry about this. This is like the worst of small group that you could possibly have, which has been rambling the whole time. But you want to allow silence, and you want to affirm it vocally. So one of the tricks that we always say is that it's really good to do is you can do the alphabet A to Z in your head twice after you ask a question. And that's a really good way, because we can be uncomfortable with silence sometimes too. But Alpha is really good at helping you to just allow people, because again, they process information differently. Some people might be grappling with big questions. Some people might be trying to find the right words. Some people are trying to connect with a feeling or emotion. Some people might be grappling with a very big thing that they're about to share, and you don't want to be the juggernaut that goes through that. So allowing silence and affirming it vocally and saying, look, it's okay. We're going to just sit here in silence. Let's just embrace the silence. Let's just have a few moments just to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to share if they would like to. It will be uncomfortable at the beginning, but that is a okay. So that is pretty much a whistle-stop tour of Alpha. There's an awful lot of information that I do know, and I'm terribly sorry that we've kind of wolfed through that in so much. But as we said, we'll be sharing the slides at the end, and we'll be sharing the recording of this too. We'll also share where you will be able to find supplementary videos for training that might help you through things too. But in the spirit of Alpha, we've got 6 minutes left. Is there anyone who has any questions? Is there anyone who disagrees with anything I've said? Or anything like that? The floor is open, so please do feel free to jump in if anybody has any.
John, you didn't really touch on people who talk too much. How does one head that off at the pass?
Yeah, so that is a really, really good point. So there are people who talk too much. Now, there's a couple of different ways that you might like to be able to deal with it. You obviously don't want to be disrespectful for people, but there are some people who just love talking, as you can sense. I'm one of those people. But what you want to try and do is, if you can, you want to respect people when they're saying it, but sometimes you'll know when a point has finished and when they're going on to a completely separate, often tangential memory that they would like to go into. So if you can, during those moments, it's trying to find a moment, an appropriate gap in the conversation, saying, thank you so much, Teresa, I really appreciate that. What does everyone else think? Or, you know, trying to find those moments. Now, there might be some people, again, who, especially in the first week, are just very, very excited and want to keep talking. What can be helpful is, especially if you're doing Alpha in person, having a quick conversation with them afterwards. And just say, when everyone's left, just say, Teresa, would you mind if I just had a quick chat with you? Thank you so much. It's so exciting that you're really enjoying this. So I can see that you're enjoying the conversation. We just want to make sure that everybody is able to share and everyone is able to kind of say what they think. So I just really appreciate next time, you know, when we're talking, we might just try and ask a few other people to speak first. So that's where it can be helpful too, is that if you have people's name badges, sometimes the first couple of weeks, it can be asking people by name to speak if they have something to say. So you can do that as a way of trying to ensure that your people get to have a chance. If after a week or two and you've had conversation and they're still talking an awful lot, you can be a little bit more blunt with them, saying, look, this is so important that everyone has a chance to feel heard. So I just really would appreciate it if, you know, we were just able to concentrate and focus and try to allow people speak first. If it turns out that nobody has anything to say, then you can absolutely feel free, and you can encourage them as well and say, look, what we're going to do is the next time I ask a question, let's both of us do the alphabet A to Z twice in our head beforehand. And if no one speaks after that, then do please feel free to go. But we just want to make sure that everyone has a chance. So it's just about communicating clearly and giving them that opportunity. Most of the time it goes well. Every now and then it doesn't go well. It can be difficult. People can get a little bit of a hump, but it is all about that art, just trying to help people feel loved and feel known, but just trying to make sure that everybody has a chance to be able to be heard. Does that sound all right, Teresa? Great. Cheers. Anne.
We seem to have a great team, I have to say. We have great backing from the church. We have all the things that should be there. It's actually trying to get people in after a certain. We've had quite a few of them now, and we've had good numbers, but it's harder and harder, if you know what I mean, to try and get more people in. Just what do people do to get the numbers up, I suppose, is what I'm looking at.
Yeah, it's a really good question. So there's a few different things that people can do. I suppose one of the first things to think about is, who are you trying to target? Or is there a specific kind of person that you might like to target? Sometimes people can say, okay, well, look, this time around, we might like to try and reach out to, parents of communion and confirmation candidates or something like that. You could try and go at it that way. Another way is sometimes putting it on the team sometimes and saying, look, is there somebody who, let's take some time to pray about this before. And is there someone in our own lives? And we'll kind of go for a smaller alpha this year. And we're just really going to try and pray for the people who we think the Lord might be calling to do it at this moment in time. Is try and think maybe outside the box to do it. Another one could be around the timing that the alpha is happening. Sometimes it doesn't fit in with the life and times of different people who are doing certain things. So sometimes it might just be about thinking, is there a different way of doing that? Or even where the alpha is being held, even the space that it's being held with. Sometimes if it's in the church hall or something, it might be, okay, well, look, if we try and do it in a cafe or do it in someone's home, see, does that kind of make a difference? Is it easier for people to cross a threshold that isn't into a physical space that's associated with the church, for example? Sometimes it might be the case, sometimes it mightn't be. But there is that point that sometimes you get to a saturation point around the people who you normally would know. So what we'd suggest in those moments is that it can be helpful maybe even sometimes to do, so we have like the marriage course, for example. So sometimes you could say, okay, well, look, what we're going to do this time is we're just going to run a marriage course. We're going to invite all the married couples who we know to kind of come along to that. And through that, we might get to know, other people who we might then be able to invite along to Alpha, or we run a parenting course, or we kind of go into different spaces and really try and think about putting ourselves outside of our comfort zones to meet people. Because one of the biggest problems is that when you are a committed Christian, the number of non-Christians who can actually decrease quite a bit. And that's a problem. If we're trying to reach out, we're trying to bring other people to come to know Jesus, we need to put ourselves outside of our comfort zone and try to get other people. And rather thinking, why aren't they coming into our space? We need to get uncomfortable and walk out into their space and get to know more people, not, with an ulterior motive, but genuinely walking with people, trying to do that too. Now, some of those are longer term things than others, but I think sometimes about trying to really think and pray to see who the Lord might be working, because oftentimes there are people who the Lord is really working in their lives already. Do you know what I mean? And so there could be a chance with that, whether it's going through the local GAA club, you know what I mean, seeing if there are some people there, or trying to find different spaces perhaps that you haven't already done in, and can be ways of thinking about that. Is there anyone else who has any thoughts? We're ready to go into the final 3 seconds. Does anyone else have any thoughts around that, around how they might be able to bring other people in?
Mass talks and speaking outside so people can ask you questions.
Sorry, what was that, Regina?
Mass talks and then stay outside afterwards and people ask you questions. We have some great encounters that way.
Yeah. So if you give a talk and you explain at the church what's happened, then being available for conversations afterwards can be really good too. Listen, we're about to hop back into the main room. Thank you so much, everyone. It has been a real privilege and a